Okay, my name is Lilia Moritz. This is my project. It is less academic and more a creative project, and I'm doing this in one semester. So I'm still trying to put everything together, understand all of the sources I'm reading, do the lit review, everything like that. But I am writing a children's lit book. It's going to be an autobiography about my adoption story from Russia. I was 2 years old when I was adopted, and I was adopted with my sister. So growing up, I always knew I was adopted, but I didn't fully understand what that meant. But I knew that through books that were about adoption, it really helped me understand myself and like acknowledge the feelings with it. So that's sort of one of the main reasons I decided on writing a children's lit book. Also in the future, I'm going to foster and adopt, and in my psych career, I'm hoping to be without population. So like foster parents, bio parents, foster kids, adoptees. I'm also hoping to do law school in a few years and be an attorney for youth in foster care. So it's really essential that I understand what it feels like to be adopted, all of the system, and I want to be a voice for adoptees because something I found in the lit review that was really interesting is that in someone's source, soon she had looked at 40 different authors from 36 different books, and only 2 of them were adoptees. So a lot of the people writing about adoption weren't adopted themselves. So I'm hoping to change that and bring in like my story. They understand adoption just from a different perspective. So I'm just hoping to bring another like autobiography. In the middle, you can see some of the books that I read when I was growing up. My adopted mom made that top middle book because it was a picture book of my story. So it had all the pictures of me being adopted, my sister, what that part of Russia looked like, giving like the dates of like court and when we came home, all of that stuff. So I grew up knowing my own story, but I know that not everyone knows their story growing up, let alone what it entails and how to process that emotionally. I have the other books that I read growing up, and some of them aren't even with like humans, but it relates to that. It's like animals, like the mother of Chaco. So the bottom right one, When I Met You, was my favorite one because it was specifically about Russian adoption. And I felt really close to that, knowing that I was also adopted from Russia. It wasn't just, I don't have a mom, let me find a mom. It was specifically being adopted from Russia to the United States. Things I'm going through in my lit review is author stats. So like I mentioned, 2 of the 40 authors being adopted, that's one of the stats that I have in there. And then I think it was like 26 of the 40 were adopted parents. And then the rest were like academia, people who understand adoption. I'm also going through different aspects of each book. So like each book and each character, doing an analysis on how those characters are portrayed. So for example, birth mothers, sometimes they're just in the picture, like the child was born from the birth mother and she couldn't take care of, basically that kind of thing. But some of them explain how the birth mothers are brave in giving their children to someone else to take care of. Other times they're just viewed negatively. So I'm learning about how they're portrayed and how I can use that for my story. Same with adopted parents. Sometimes they're seen as saviors and that the child needed to be saved. And for me personally, in my story, it is true, but it's also sometimes something I've been thinking about a lot with this whole project is I was saved from that environment, but in the process of being given a new place and a new home, it meant I had to lose something else. So that's something that's portrayed in children's books, and I'm gonna add that into mine, but also add like my psych degree and what I've learned with that, with like emotional development in kids and cognitive development, processing, all of that, and add that into like my story, give more details, so then the adoptees or adoptive parents reading the book can understand what it is like to be adopted, more than just being like, oh, they needed me to home and they haven't parent. So I have all those details that I'm going to add about how the adoptee adjusts to new home, how the family adjusts. There's one source said there are 4 different stages of adoption, and in my lit review, I'm going to focus that around parents and how they have a lot going on with those 4 stages. It's pre-adoption is the first one, which is like very focused on parents and what they do. Then another one was the adjustment and accommodation. That's more like the parents getting to know the child and the child getting to know the parents. They're all living together and everything. And in that section, I'm going to add in how it is very important to acknowledge that the child is going through a really big life event, and how it can actually be traumatic for them, even though it is good for their future. So in my lit review, I'm going to mention that kind of stuff, and then add how reading books to kids about this is going to be really beneficial. I'm going to add the whole lit review, like the literature, and how talking to the kids really helps about that. I'm also looking into the sentence structure for the age group that I'm doing the book for. I'm gearing it more towards the younger audience, so the adoptive parents don't feel like they need to wait a certain age for the child to understand the book that they're reading. Why book for children, so they can understand what it's like for me and correlate like their story with mine. It's also going to be a connection time for parents with the kids, hoping that the adoptive parents will read the book with the kid, and then saying that, hoping that the kid acknowledges that while they're talking about the storyline, they can relate it to their story, and hoping that parents will understand that the child can express their story, their feelings, understanding while they're reading the book. They can point out like something like, oh yeah, I was adopted internationally, I relate with that. And it can be like a conversation starter between the parents and the adoptees. So since I'm doing this project in one semester, I have a lot going on. So I have sources for my own story, so I'm putting that together. So I'm creating like an outline of my story, turning that into an outline for the book. And then I have like over 100 pictures from my story, so I'm going to pick those out. I'm going to do the illustrations myself, all while writing the lit review. And then I'm going to publish it later on after I graduate, whenever I feel confident in my work and have more resources for that. The picture right there on the right is going to be the cover of my book. And there have been limitations, which is doing it in a really short time, having to cram everything together and not having education behind how to do this. So I'm learning how to do it while I'm doing it. It's really cool, but it's a little stressful. But yeah. Questions for Lilia? Yep.
Would you say there's a difference between an etic and endemic perspective in terms of like book writing? Because if you're coming from what you said, I'm going to assume that you're going at it from an etic perspective, which you're essentially writing about from inside the culture, since it's your understanding, since you were adoptee versus other authors, they were either adoptive parents or they, like you said, were probably philosophers or in terms of academia. Would you say there's a big difference in terms of storytelling? The two?
I think so, yeah. I am in the process of reviewing a lot of like autobiography and adoption books. but from what I've noted, it's just a different style. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused at what you
Yeah, it's all good. It's just like from what I was like taught, there's emic and etic perspectives. Etic being that you're within an understanding of inside the culture versus emic, you're seeing the outside of it, and that's your understanding of it. So, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, do you think that as an adoptee, your story would give a much more difference than those of others that saw it from an outsider's perspective?
Okay, I'm hoping it will because it will be more about my story and what it feels like to be adopted. And I can give the details, but those who study it and those who are outside of it can also touch on the same topics and emotions regarding it. Yeah.
Is there a reason that you decided to create a book rather than maybe something like film or another creative expression?
I sort of thought about writing books when I was younger because I like to write and I also do music, but writing poetry is one of my ways to like express everything. So writing is just like an easy outlet for me.
For your research, to what extent were you researching like academic papers versus to what extent were you reading other children's books about adoptions, and which did you think was maybe more helpful?
I was looking over the research, like the journals and stuff for the library 251 class. So I had like 15 sources for that, and then I'm still in the process of looking over like the adoptees books. I think they're both beneficial, but I personally like reading the other books about it because I can understand like the different details and how they explain everything. And it's sort of me figuring out how I want to write it.
Are you gonna focus on like making this a point of view and reaching people who are specifically adopted from Russia or anybody who's been?
It is going to be more of an autobiography, so I'm going to touch on Russia at the beginning, but then it's just going to be about the rest of my story. So it's going to have my personal details, but in the rest, instead of like outside of the facts, I'm going to try and have it relate to all the other adoptees. So it's sort of, I'm going to try and balance it as both. Yeah.
Did you come across any literature about like transracial adoption?
I did, yeah. There was a lot about Chinese adoption. So like Chinese female adoption. That has been really interesting. Some of the sources say that like in grade school, that's when the adoptees realize that they're like different and like in skin color, and then that's when they compare themselves to their adopted family. So it's been really interesting to like see all those different sources about that, because I personally don't relate to that, but I know a lot of others do.
So you were talking about, like, towards the beginning, about how when you looked at like, the author stats, how there's actually a majority that aren't adopting themselves. Do you think in the future ever you might write a book more aimed for like parents to understand it through an adoptee's perspective?
I definitely am going to try to, yeah. I'm thinking of putting like notes for the children to be like, hey, this is, if you have any questions while you're reading this book, ask your parents or ask family or something like that. And then I also want to just touch on like a little bit about like how to like help your adopted child when reading the book, but a different book would be very interesting.
That's awesome.
I've been sitting back here thinking about the role of animals in place of people in children's books. And I don't know anything about children's literature, but I'm speculating that using a bird instead of the image of a human allows littler children to kind of relate to the storyline without like looking for themselves, I guess. Like everybody thinks of a bird is cute, not everybody looks like you. So, when you talk about you're doing the illustration, it sounds as if you're using photographs from your store, right? That's part of the illustrated component of the book, is that right?
Yeah.
Are you gonna do line drawings from those photos, or are you gonna use the photos as they are? Or what you're thinking about? I'm thinking about the illustrated part of it, not the text part.
Yeah, I did digital art during COVID, so it's just self-taught. I'm gonna have like little outlines and then it's gonna be like cartoony, sort of, a little cartoony, but a little realistic. I'm still playing around with that. But it is gonna be me instead of like a general character.
Or a yellow bird.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Lilia.